Yeah, every now and again, the nose has to go straight to the air, just straight to the sky. The nose just, oof, it's so choice. Yeah, well, welcome to Triple Take Cinema. There's no host. We're all just co-hosts. We got Dustin, we got Alex, we got Kyle. And yeah, we're just a bunch of dudes who like to watch movies. And I'm every week, one of us picks a movie or three movies to go with. Hence the name. There's three of us. There's three movies. Who knows if we'll stick to that, but just relax. So yeah, I am known throughout the annals of history and time and my friends to have a big soft spot for coming of age tales. Maybe it's because I'm in a perpetual state of arrested development myself. But yeah, there's something that really hits for me on this genre. So I wanted to the three movies I picked to go. I picked Boyhood by Richard Linklater, which I think really did me well this time around. And then I also picked Y tu mamá también by Alfonso Cuarón, which I had not seen in quite some time, which I think is a very interesting take on the coming of age tale. And then I picked Winter's Bone, starring Jennifer Lawrence. And for me, I think that coming of age is it's a weird genre. I think it can be defined in a lot of different ways. I think it's kind of in the eye of the beholder a lot of the time. And which character is actually coming of age and what that looks like and what qualifies as a coming of age tale, I think is an interesting question. I think it's pretty elusive and slippery, when you really get into what movie counts as a coming of age tale. And I think the classic is, a tale of young boys or young girls or anyone in between that is, going through something in their youth. And I don't always think that the youth aspect is, I think that's doesn't do enough justice to when a person can sort of change or come of age or evolve in some way, be it through a dramatic event or otherwise. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of what coming of age means to me. What when someone says coming of age tale, Dustin, like what do you think?
I think for me, the easy answer is like someone's growing up, like, right? Like I'm coming of age. I think of my personal story. My dad passed away a month after my college graduation, and I feel like I kind of like rocketed to adulthood in dealing with the aftermath of his death. So by default, coming of age to me is like, oh, a kid growing up. But I think really what it means when you see it manifest in movies, I mean, I think with these three in particular, it if you want to boil it down, it really is a kid growing up because the main characters are kids. But I think coming of age can also be somebody maturing in a way. So that really can happen, at a very young age, as is more stereotypical, but also I think can happen at a much older age or a middle age. And so it's really just kind of like maturing, not unexpectedly, but maturing through adversity, maybe a little bit, at least when it comes to being on film, because typically nobody wants to watch a coming of age where someone just like matures easily. And usually you don't mature unless you're like experiencing something.
Yeah,
so,
right. Like
yeah,
I would love to mature easily. That sounds great. That sounds like a dream. I don't know if I want to watch that movie, but I'd like to experience that myself.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my rambling. What it is for me. How about you, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot that comes to my mind when I think of coming of age. I do, in that kind of granular way, think about it as the transition from adolescence to adulthood, and being like kind of this liminal moment where you're in that transitory state and you're, it's about that coming into yourself. There's a self-actualization there that's happening, whether that's with confidence or worldview or, I think a lot of times it has to do with, not just thinking about who you are as an individual, but starting to think about, how can I care for other people? Like, what is the collective good? I think a lot of it's about coming outside of yourself. But yeah, for me, I think there's also that trauma element too, where, doesn't have to necessarily be big T trauma. It can definitely be something that just challenges a character in some way or makes them rethink their perspective. But I do think there has to be a low point to, kind of prompt that actualization that I was talking about.
I think that's a good way of putting it, like the low point kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, and also, okay, so you two, I was very excited to find out that neither of you had seen Boyhood. I feel like we should start with Boyhood because it seems like it's kind of like a keystone piece.
Well, but before we even dive deeper into that, let's just really quick do round robin of both, I think, what we've seen and what we hadn't, and then what order we ended up watching these in. But Kyle, I'll let you start with that.
Okay, yeah, I'd seen all three of these before. There's a part 2 of the coming of age tale episodes that we'll get into where I have some blind spots, but these were all. I think the big thing for me is I'd seen all of them, and I had seen them a while ago. So I hadn't seen Boyhood in a while. I've had a kid since then. I hadn't seen You Too, Mama, También in a long time. I mean, this is like 10 plus years, I want to say, for all these movies, maybe longer for some.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched Boyhood. And then I watched Boyhood, and then I watched Boyhood a third time because I could not stop because it got me. I just kept going. It was just like, and yeah, at the end of every night, I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll just watch more Boyhood. It's fine.
And
I
love it.
Yeah. And then I watched Winter's Bone, and I was actually able to show that to 2 friends as well who had never seen it. And then I watched Y Tu Mama También last. So that was kind of how it all worked for me.
That I hadn't seen any of these. I was familiar with all 3, and I watched them in the same order. Though I will say I started Y Tu Mama También and watched, I think, 20 minutes of it, and then it's not because I wasn't liking it per se. I wasn't loving it, but I stopped, and I not immediately, but I then the next day watched Winter's Bone before I came back to Y Tu Mama También. I also feel like I was eating when I was first watching it, and because it was subtitled, like I couldn't really it's something we can talk about on this episode and future ones. I have no problems with subtitled films and watching foreign language films, but sometimes I forget about like how much more engaged I have to be to watch them when
dude, it's real. It's very real.
Like you need a double vision. You have to be seeing like what's in the frame and then the text at the bottom. It requires like, you're flipping back and forth. At least I am.
And I'm I watch everything with captions. So that's not super hard for me, but it's like I can't even take my eyes off the screen and like check my phone without not fully missing things because it's in a foreign language. So that was a bit of. It's been a while since I've watched a foreign language film not in the theater where you're obviously a captive audience kind of a thing. So how about you, Alex? Which ones have you seen and what order did you watch these in?
Yeah, I had actually seen 2 of these before. I saw Boyhood back when it first came out, and I saw Winter's Bone in college, probably around 10 or 11 years ago. And yeah, Y Tu Mama También was the first new one for me, and I watched it in the exact same order. I went Boyhood, Winter's Bone, Y Tu, which was a nice progression. I feel like we went from the kind of whimsy of Boyhood to the bleak reality of Winter's Bone, and then I feel like Y Tu Mama También had a bit of both. So it's kind of like a nice marriage of both of those tones. But yeah, I'm very excited to get into Boyhood. Kyle, I hold you partially responsible for my love of Linklater and introducing me to the Before trilogy when we lived together in South Korea. And yeah, maybe a good way to get into this is, how does Boyhood fit into your understanding of Linklater, and where do you put it, in his filmography?
Oh man, where do I put it in his filmography? That's a question. I think ooh man, that's tough. It's really so there's a couple of things. There's a couple of things that I really sink my teeth into. I think Boyhood, if I'm being very cinephile, if I'm being very film student nerd, Boyhood as a technical achievement and a committed to the commitment of a project, not only to see it through, but also I haven't watched many interviews with Richard Linklater. I don't really know his vibe personally. I kind of think I do based on his movies that he's made, but and also to be able to work with some of those actors and actresses for that amount of time kind of speaks to someone who's a good dude, or at least nice to work with on an artistic level. But just to be able to keep that project together for that long is shocking.
There was one of the trivia things I was reading about it. So the sister in that movie, I think her name's Sam, is played by his daughter. and halfway through shooting it, she didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because she was going through puberty, and she was like, I don't want to do this. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just, I mean, I think part of it was going through puberty, and I imagine just like she just decided she didn't want to do it, and he had to like convince her to do it. The other thing I thought was interesting in terms of the structure and commitment is that Linklater, who I think it's given the amount of times they've worked together, him and Ethan Hawke are like good friends, straight up told Ethan Hawke, if I die, you have to finish this movie for me. And then I believe it was Ethan Hawke in an interview was talking about how wild it is that the producers at New Line or whatever production company paid for it, like had to like squirrel away like $400K every year over a decade, and like just kind of be like, yeah, that's for a big project, or
We're working on something. It'll be a big deal. It's gonna be a big deal. Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. Like that is why. Well, what's even not, I guess, unsurprising is I guess he just started another movie that's like going to be 20 years in the making.
wow.
Within the last 2 or 3 years, like that's a new project that he started to tackle. So
is Ethan Hawke also the godfather of that one where he has to carry on?
Maybe, but they're probably both getting at the same age that he probably needs to tap into someone younger to be the steward should something happen to him.
Sounds like his daughter's got to step up. Sorry, sis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and so that to me, like where I put it in his filmography, it's tough, man, because I love the Before trilogy, and I almost think of it as like one. I think it's easy to think of as one piece.
Sure.
I have a hard time. I love them, and they mean so much to me, those movies. And Days of Confused is very good, and there's other movies in his filmography that I like a lot. But I think as a technical achievement, and also like the actual movie itself, but the mechanics plus the movie itself, to me, kind of elevate it to the top spot. And I think it also is it pulls on a lot of autobiographical stuff for him, having, grown up in Texas and all that, as a lot of his movies take place there. And to be able to, when I was watching it this time, the big difference for me was that I was focused on the boy's journey when I watched it the first time, because that was my life. Not that I was in Texas and all that, but like I was the boy, right? Like I see that in myself. I see that growing up. And this time I was entirely focused on the parents. I was entirely focused on the parents. And the thing that really stuck out to me this time, upon watching, many things did, but like something that just got me continuously, and I think is kind of like the work of a master when it comes to this type of film, is the incredibly subtle passing of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how, when you're focused on the boy and the growing up, it didn't really, when the first time I watched it, that subtlety and kind of the pain and the joy of that passing of time, and how it is what happens. Like, it is what all parents say. And frankly, it's what they don't even have to have kids. But at some point you're like, wait a second, where did the last 10 years go? Where did the last year go? Like these moments of realization of, oh shit, I'm going to be a senior in college. I'm going to be, you know what I mean? Like, am I about to turn 40? You know what I mean? Like, where did that go? And how it kind of sneaks up on you in that way. The way that is expressed visually in this film it's like hard to put into words how well it was executed and edited and put together, so that there's just these subtle differences. It's just a little facial hair. It's a little haircut. It's a little change of face. It's a little language. It's, like it was just from beat to beat, from point to point, as they move on through this journey. And, that's something that really stuck with me. And then how it's very mundane, and it's somehow, it elevates mundaneness to a level that I don't have another reference point in film for,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that they talk about it, the blue whale conversation, the conversation that he has about the country song, and how the country song is just plain, nothing, everything's simple, no big deal. And how every single scene are just it's just like what happens in a life. And yeah, there's big moments too. I don't want to say it's just all mundane nonsense, right? Like,
but even the big moments are grounded in monotony. Like even the stuff with her first or her second husband, when he starts becoming abusive and stuff. Not that that's not insignificant or anything, but like there's nothing Hollywood about that. There's nothing like theatrical about that in a way. So it crafts like a relatability that I feel like I don't see. You don't see that often, if ever. I mean, I'm sure there's other movies that we can get that vibe from, but like I'm hard pressed to think of another one. Like for me, this movie, I loved this, absolutely loved it, and I was familiar with it, and I was like, why have I not watched this? And then I'm like, well, it came out 10 years ago, and I feel like it wasn't what I expected it to be in multiple ways. Like I thought it was gonna be, I thought it was gonna have more of a story per se, like right, like, but I'm glad it didn't. I feel like I it felt more humanizing to me that it didn't, and it felt. I was talking to somebody over the weekend about like, would I have liked this movie as much if I watched it in 2014? And I don't know that I would have. Like I feel not that I would have hated it or anything. I would have been impressed by it, and I probably would have enjoyed it. I like kind of like the soundtrack, even though like there's some like there's Coldplay in it, which is a little rough, but like there's enough of like I'm like, man, if I would have seen this when it came out, like I probably would have enjoyed it. I maybe would have revisited it, but I don't think it would have hit me in the same way even on a second viewing as it did with this one. It's I like was trying to do the math. Like I graduated college in 2009, and by the timeline of the movie, I think the main character is going to college, is starting college in like 2012. So there's like a 7-year difference there, give or take, but there was enough overlap that it felt nostalgic enough to me. Like it's the first time I remember watching a movie and feeling nostalgia from it that actually feels real. Like some of it was like, oh yeah, like I remember laying in my bedroom playing Halo with a friend. Like
Right.
Yeah. And the way they
I-
use those products is amazing, right? Like the Game Boy,
Yes.
to the next, like
Yeah.
they're just
Yeah, so it's just like for me it was very like, oh, like this makes me like miss my dad. Like this makes me like my parents divorced when I was 3. I'm fortunate that my mom remarried to a great guy who I think of as a second father, but like and I got to see my dad, I think maybe more than they got to see Ethan Hawke in this movie, but it's still like my dad was still kind of the fun guy who would take me out and we would bum around and do stuff, and it was like, damn, this just like feels, it doesn't feel like my life, but it feels like a life I could have lived in a much more realistic way than like, oh, I'm watching a superhero movie, like it'd be great if I was a superhero kind of a thing. Like yeah, I feel that watching some movies, it would be cool to be this action star, but like this actually feels like, no, like this very much could have been my life sort of a thing.
And what's really cool is that I also had that same feeling that it sounds like both of you guys had on that initial viewing of seeing yourself in that journey. I think a big part of it are those context clues and the facts that we are in the same broad age range as Mason, where, you know, seeing him watching Toonami and Dragon Ball Z as a kid after school is like immediately deeply relatable. So you have the cultural context clues, but you've also got the like universal life experience of, you know, growing up in America. Like I remember going to construction sites with my friends and like fucking around and drinking beers and, you know, breaking shit, and just little moments like that I feel like were just so, you know, resonant because they were easy to imagine myself in. Whereas stuff like the, you know, that felt a little bit more dramatized to me was the, you know, the abusive second husband subplot felt a little bit more Hollywood, more fictionalized. I felt like I had seen that story in movies before, where the other more mundane stuff had like a newness and a uniqueness to it that, you know, that really captivated me. Um, I'd love to hear what you guys think about the performances, because that really elevated this for me on this watch, where I really liked it my first watch. This second watch, I absolutely adored it. And I think it had to do with kind of like you, Kyle. I really resonated with Ethan Hawke and Patricia Arquette's characters. the first time I got really shooken up by Patricia Arquette's monologue about this being all there is, and that big scene where she breaks down at the end when Mason's going off to college. But there were just so many great acting choices throughout. I love how Ethan Hawke, still gives his character that kind of punk rock swagger, even when he's become more of a straight-laced, button-down guy by the end. He still has mannerisms that let you know, like, yeah, he's still the same guy. But I'd love to hear, Kyle, what you thought of the performances, after seeing this movie a bunch in the past couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely adored them, and I understood. It's funny, like Ethan Hawke's progression is amazing. From that, like, and it's also it's just kind of amazing to think about how they're also not entirely acting, because they have aged those years. Like they themselves are they understand the passage of time more than just someone taking on a character. And I thought that, like, I would just love if I had ever gotten into acting in a real way, that would have been like such an interesting project to take on, right? And actually the performance that stuck out to me in a new way this time, because I love that Patricia Arquette, that model, all the stuff. Like, frankly, how there was the first time I watched it, and she yells at her daughter who's going to the new school and is like, "I'm just here now. I'm just at this school. Like, this sucks." And she yells at her daughter that it, like, also sucks to be, have her head smashed against a wall. But she does it in this way where she's so at the end of her rope, and like her yelling feels like exhausted. And the first time I saw that, I was like, oh man, I don't know if she like really handled that line or delivered that line in the best way possible. And now that I'm older and seeing this movie, I'm like, nope, that's how that line would have been delivered in real life, because there's no way to say that eloquently. There's no way to say that like well. It's just this giant up just comes out of you like, yeah, it sucks for everyone. It sucks for me, you know what I mean? Like, you kind of lose it. So the moments of losing it, I thought were fantastic. But again, to go back to what the performance that kind of stuck out to me this time, it's just funny that she didn't want to continue doing it, is the daughter, and like her progression as this sister. And that moment at like the graduation where she's like, good luck. And then they're out at the bar and she's talking about how college is great, but she's giving, and like throughout the whole movie, she's giving her mom a lot of shit about just being carted around as a kid. I just kind of thought her performance was like, had a lot to it that I didn't really see the first time, probably because I was so focused on Mason and his parents, which is like what I was thinking about myself. And I have 2 older sisters, and like, yeah, it's taken me a while to sort of appreciate some of the stuff that they went through. And I just thought that one really stuck out to me. But yeah, I thought Ethan Hawke's like Patricia Arquette's final monologue is great as well. But Ethan Hawke's like the last conversation he kind of has with Mason at the gig where Jimmy's there and he's playing, when he's talking about women and girls and, if this is going to happen and you're going to go through this, like that I thought was just very, very, very well executed and felt like a very real type of, I haven't been able to be your father. I've started this new family. I've sold your GTO, all this stuff. Like I'm not perfect, but I am having this very real conversation about life and women and relationships, and you're about to go off. And that just felt extremely authentic and justified with where everything had come from. So the performances are, I just thought, I don't know. I can't think of one that was really all that weak when it comes to it. Yeah.
For me, I mean, Ethan Hawke's, like I mentioned before, like I'm a sucker for movies that like have like positive father figures and stuff, just because I lost my dad, not early, but far earlier than I would have preferred. And so that kind of like always hits me. I will say this gives me like, made something you said, Kyle, made me think, you focusing more on the daughter's story and things like that. I read a Letterboxd review that I think it was a good review. I mean, I think they gave it like a 3.5 or a 4 and out of 5. But their one critique was one that I laughed at, and I like kind of did disagree. And it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek critique, but like it was something along the lines of, 12 years watching Mason grow up and he just turns into like a photo class, like existential, like mushroom kid, like, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I kind of like, I do feel like that. I don't feel like his path in growing up was per se like prototypical of the archetype of a stoner kid, for lack of a better word. I wouldn't call his character a stoner kid, but he's like in that, hemisphere kind of a space. I would much rather see that than like him be a jock or a nerd. But I feel like for me, like, I wasn't a stoner kid. I was kind of a nerd, but I was not the nerdiest kid. Like, I always felt like in high school, I mean, like, my junior and senior year of high school, like, I hung out with the band kids and I did not play an instrument. Like, I did not have, I had my friends, but I did not have like a clear, distinguished clique that I fit into. And I've never really seen a movie define that well, of kids who were like generally like not bullied, not like popular, not unpopular, just kind of like hovered through. That was me in high school. And so I was a little bummed that like, oh yeah, here's like prototypical, like, oh, if you're thinking about life, you're a stoner, like kind of a thing. Again, I don't think that ruined the movie for me or anything, but reading that review, I'm like, yeah, I don't disagree that this is just a little cliche that's the role that he like carves out for himself.
I mean, I like that. At the same time, I'm kind of like, yeah, way to tell that kid at 18 what he was. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, the movie's not actually over, right? He has to continue and grow up.
For sure. But just like the scene, I mean, it was a good scene, but like the scene of him like in photo class and like, I'm just going to go brood in the dark room, which the instructor clearly makes obvious that like nobody is fucking using at all. And he's like, I'm going to go brood in the dark room, which, don't get me wrong. Like, I think about when I had photo class and like the dark room was fucking dope. Like, I would love to hang out in a dark room more. Like, old school photo development is fun as hell, in my opinion. So I get that, but that was my one, I mean, I wouldn't even call it critique, but like stray observation kind of a thing.
It's funny you had that read of it, because that was something I think I really enjoyed, was how, and maybe this is my bias as a former pseudo stoner kid, but I enjoyed seeing Mason like adopt the like iconography of different high school cliques as he was growing up. Like, when he was in the darkroom scene, that's very much like a moment in time that you're seeing, like all these snapshots where he's got the earrings in, he's got his hair and like the full surfer, he's trying on these different personas and looks, because that's what we did in high school. That's what you do when you're in adolescence, is you try on all these different, suits and see like what fits, what feels like me. So I think what made me appreciate like that it was a little bit cliche was that you then see him kind of move beyond that. And like, sure, it's a different kind of cliche when he's sitting in the diner with his girlfriend and talking about like, man, it's going to be so great at college where we can just stay out till 4 a.m. and, do what we want. Like, that's, that's so archetypal that it also, feels a little tropey. But again, he moves beyond that at the very end when he has the Big Bend hike and he's, like actually engaging on an existential level with, the things around him, and they just show that through the filmmaking and all these great vistas. But yeah, it's really interesting hearing that Letterboxd review and that take, because that was something I definitely latched onto. But it was like, oh, it's it's cool that we're seeing Mason like try on different high school personas as he tries to find out who he is.
Yeah, and I think if you're, like, to speaking of that review, I think kind of similar to maybe something, like you said, Dustin, where you were expecting more story, you were expecting more, things to kind of happen. And I think that, there can be a way to view this movie where you gear up for some kind of big, big story, big narrative, and then it just kind of takes you on this float down this life, and doesn't really focus on a lot of those big moments. And in fact, like, kind of intentionally leaves them out. And yeah, like, there's a couple of scenes or lines that I just wanted to like highlight. One is that scene where they go and they go to some construction site or some building that isn't being built or being built.
It was some kid's house.
Yeah, it was
his family's house. Which I'm like, what fucking world do you live in where your parents are like, yeah, sure, go hang out among the dangerous construction tools that the construction people just fucking leave out. Like, nobody's gonna fucking steal them, and just spend the night there. What the fuck?
It was very funny to me. I was like, this is camping? I guess Texas is weird. But something I thought was very interesting in that scene is one, how they're all talking about like, oh, who did you have sex with? Who have you, what play have you gotten? And they all go around, and Mason says like, yeah, this happened. And it happened, some other girl in some other town. No one knows her. But it really didn't have this kind of feel to me of that he was lying. And it also didn't have the feel like, when he's like, I don't care if you guys believe me or not. That kind of felt like he was talking directly to the viewer of the movie. But because it's also like, oh, well, this is a classic coming of age tale. It kind of feels like your first sexual experience would be a big fucking deal. But you know what? We didn't talk about that at all. We don't have your first kiss. We don't have your first sexual experience. We don't have any of that. We talk about like, oh, do you have a girlfriend? Kind of. Have you kissed? No. Do you even talk? No. Do you like her at all? No, not really. We have nothing in common. That's kind of all we get. And I kind of like that a lot. And another thing about that scene that kind of killed me, but also speaks to like Linklater's ability to be subtle and mundane, was that entire scene. I'm just expecting something horrible to happen.
Oh yeah.
I'm just
sure.
like, especially when they pick up the goddamn blade, the buzzsaw, and they're throwing it. I'm like, someone's about to lose a finger. Shit's about to go down.
I was like watching through my fingers. Shit.
Nothing happens.
Yep.
They just have a good night.
Yeah. Doing like the most like obnoxiously like adolescent boy bullshit possible. Like, let's drink beer, talk about fucking, and throw fucking razor blades around
at the wall.
Like fucking, and that was, I thought that was like extra realistic in how like not cool it was watching them throw the razors at the blades, the saw blades at the wall. It was like they were standing like 3 feet away, and like, but when they threw it, they're all like, "Yeah, that's awesome."
Yeah, I can attest to this. In college, we like got a cork board, and we got a bunch of ninja throwing stars from the mall, and we took turns like throwing them at like handmade dartboards, and we did not look cool. We looked exactly like Mason and his friends.
But it was very realistic in the moment that they all thought it was the fucking coolest thing on the planet. But it's like any outside observer is gonna like look at that and be like, "This is stupid."
This is real dumb.
Dumbest thing.
But there, okay. And there's two more like. So obviously the editing, the whole way it was put together, like blew my mind. But there's two shots that I think really stuck with me as like filmmaking shots in this. Filmmaking shots, for lack of a better term. We'll come up with something better than that in the future. And they both involve Patricia Arquette. And one is where she's collecting the kids from the abusive alcoholic. You know what I mean? And for a lot of it, not all of it, but for a lot of it, the camera is from inside the house at her, and she's very clearly not wanting to enter the house. And just kind of that, like, for me, it really just highlighted that moment of the danger that she feels going anywhere near there, and kind of this big separation, but the need to go in and kind of like call for the children to come out and figure out how to extract them without it getting bad. And, like the camera switches to outside the house and her perspective when he's trying to like get her to come in and, like in any way he can. I thought that was a very, very affecting way to shoot that scene and really build up that big moment of drama, frankly, in a movie that is otherwise, doesn't have a lot of those. And then the other one is in that Patricia Arquette monologue scene right towards the end, right before Mason goes off to college, when she has downsized everything and she's in her apartment and she's sold it all and everyone's leaving and she has the empty nest freak out kind of monologue. And there's a couple of shots where Mason's in the other room and it just is, it backs up and you see the apartment and you see her way off to the left. There's nothing in center other than like just the empty, the kitchen apartment we're all very familiar with, right? Like if everyone's been around a million of those apartments, and just how there's nothing. It's like, it's one of the, it really visually for me kind of captured that empty nest feeling of not only I'm not even in the middle of my own empty nest. I'm like to the side. I'm barely even in the shot. And then there's just nothing. And it's not a house, and it's not big. It's not grand. It's not some big end of life thing. It's like the downsizing. And then all the monologue really hits on that too. But it goes back out to that shot a couple of times that I just loved. Like I just loved those camera movements.
Yeah, I'm glad you articulated that, because I had an emotional reaction to that scene where it was like, man, I really feel bad for her character right now, for the fact that she's had to do this downsize. Like, I did think, it looks visually like a sad scene, and that hit me on a gut level, but that's nicely articulated with the framing, with her being so shunted to the side.
And then just emptiness. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to think of a good segue, but we should move into Winter's Bone. I'm going to try and do like segues for everything in every episode. I'll be the segue guy, and I'll try and I'll roll on screen with the segue. No, that's not the right segue. I'll try and think of something very obnoxious. So speaking of empty nests, how about, do squirrels build nests? I don't know. But how could they if they're getting skinned like they did in Winter's Bone? That's a terrible segue. I'll cut that out in editing.
No, please leave that.
No, that's staying in. That was
leave
gold.
That in.
Solid gold.
Do not. Yeah, I mean, well, so Alex had seen it. So you had not seen Winter's Bone as well, Dustin? Yeah,
I have
none
not.
of these. You see none of these. So what was your take on Winter's Bone? What was your feelings?
Like this was a one where I talked about Boyhood, how I was familiar with all three of these. I feel like of the three, Boyhood was the one that was maybe, even though it wasn't exactly what I expected, was the one that was like pretty much in the realm of what I expected. Winter's Bone, I feel like I had the perception that it was like more of an action movie, or maybe not. An action movie isn't right. Maybe it's more of a thriller. It definitely is a thriller, but it's not a thriller first and foremost. It's like not, it doesn't have a good thriller like resolution. The core mystery is adjacently solved, but I mean she kind of knows what happened to her dad, but never really knows. So I definitely thought I knew it was like a dark movie, but I thought it was going to be like, this is a very mundane way of putting it, but like I thought it was going to be a little lighter. Like, so I didn't, and I liked it. I don't think it's one that I ever will feel compelled to rewatch, and that's not because I feel like it was so visceral that it like affected me so much and it weighs on me, and I don't need that emotion. Like I found it, again, I'm glad I watched it. It was what I consider a blind spot. I know it was like Jennifer Lawrence's like breakout role and stuff like that. I do like, John Hawkes is great. Like I enjoyed the acting in it, but I kind of found it a little boring. Like I didn't find it like super compelling in a way, because I'll just leave it at that for right now.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, what do you got?
Yeah, so I feel you on the boring, and I don't say that as a criticism of the movie explicitly. Like I like this. This was my second viewing of it, and I barely remember my first watch, but the way that scenes play out is kind of repetitive in this, is how I describe it, where once you know like what the stakes are, what the tension is, that in her trying to find her father, she's going to have to violate this code of silence, that's upheld within the drug dealing community in the Ozarks. And every conversation is going to have this like undercurrent of a threat of physical violence. There's going to be someone like saying like, nope, you can't talk to this person. And there's a sameness and a repetitiveness to that, which I think is intentional. I think it's part of the story, and it's part of the struggle that is it Rue, the character's name?
Ree,
that Ree is going through, where she has to like constantly just come up against these walls. And I thought like that was compelling, but I can see how you would find parts of it boring, because that sameness did wear on me a little bit as I was watching it.
and compelling enough that, like, again, like, I'm glad I watched it, but like I'm hard pressed to see a scenario, and I gave it 4 out of 5. Like, I'm hard pressed to see a scenario where I'm like, I feel like there's something more emotional for me to get out of this movie, or like something I can enjoy on a repeated viewing, or is there, is this idle background movie, or those for me are 99% of the time action movies of like a background movie, or just like I want to rewatch something stupid. This is not a stupid movie in a good or bad way. So yeah, it was kind of like, when I think of the setting of this, the Ozarks and the drug dealers and stuff, that piece of the puzzle is more interesting to me than the piece that we're seeing here. And not that I don't want to see the piece of her story, but I would love to have seen more context of, like, I mean, I understand why they didn't show what happened to the dad for storytelling purposes and whatnot, but like that would have been more interesting to me, or to like understand, because and I understand it's deliberately opaque what happened to him, and I kind of fit the puzzle pieces together, but I'm also like, but like, what, tell me more about the sheriff and like his relationship with the thump guy, and the fact that, like, how was her dad dumb enough to like not know that the sheriff was in cahoots, and that if he started spilling his beans to the sheriff was just going to go up the chain of the bad guy command and be like, your boy's ratting out on you, kind of a thing. So like some of that stuff just kind of lost me in it.
Yeah, and I will say it was interesting. I agree with what you're saying, Alex, as well. Like it was a little bit intentional to kind of have that sameness in scene play out. At least it felt a little bit intentional, and that to me is kind of like, that's the world. This is this level of poverty. This is this level of, like, I don't know, how does one break themselves out of having to take care of their kids because their mom is off their rocker and doesn't talk anymore, and the dad's dead, and like these things happen where you're going to lose your house and you got to prove to someone your dad died, but you like just like the inertia of that world, I kind of felt in all those scenes. And like, yeah. And it also in that world where there's that much inertia, there's always this like little bit of threat of violence that's always there. You're always on the edge in a way. My memory of this movie was that it was more impactful than it was for me this time. And I think part of that, and this also kind of speaks to, I think watching these 3 movies with a level of intention to try to also come to this podcast to talk about coming of age tales with a theme. And we can get into this into Ichi Mama Tambien as well. But like, I think what I really enjoy about coming of age tales is how more than other genres, more consistently anyway than other genres, my viewings of movies with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 years in between them can be so much different, it seems like, with the coming of age genre than a lot of other genres. Do you know what I mean? Like Superbad always speaks to me in the same way, and I love it. But
you don't consider Superbad a coming of age movie?
I do.
Well, not a coming of age drama, I suppose.
No, yeah. No, I mean, it is, and it certainly is, but like, I get the same thing out of it every time I watch it, and it's amazing. You know what I mean? But like, when I watched Boyhood, I had totally different focuses based on where I'm at in my life. And when I watched Winter's Bone this time, I kind of felt a little bit of that boringness or whatever, a little bit of that just marching forward, the plotting. I wasn't shocked by this abject poverty. I wasn't shocked by this world existing. I wasn't shocked by the nuances of this world. I wasn't shocked by the fact that, like, you know what I mean? Like, I know more about the world now than I did when I watched this the first time. And so a lot of these things just weren't shocking in a way that... Yeah.
Well, and you're making me feel like, this came out in 2010, and I feel like, I don't want to say this aged poorly. I don't feel like there's anything in it that, when I hear the phrase aged poorly, I read it as like, oh yeah, if I watch that now, like, I'm actively seeing something that's very offensive that I didn't see then. Tropic Thunder, great example. Things that are aged very poorly. I don't think this aged poorly in that regard, but I don't think it's aged particularly well. Like, I don't think that Boyhood's great because there are multiple stories being told and you can fully dive headfirst in any of them or multiple ones and come back on a repeated viewing and see, like, you very much have like who you empathize with changes and things like that. This, and not that there's anything wrong with like single focus linear storytelling or anything like that, or a single story to tell, but there's something about this movie that just feels like, oh yeah, this would have hit harder in 2010. Like, if it came out today in 2014, not that this, it would have been told more gruesomely or something, but it's just like, yeah, like there was just a different, it's just a product of its time in a way that I wouldn't normally use that description. Like, I'm sure we'll come across other movies that I will call a product of its time, but this one just feels, it feels very 2010 to me. Like, if I didn't know it came out in 2010 and I watched it and someone's like, that came out in 2010, I'd be like, I get this. Like, I could totally, this feels like a movie of that era from like 2007 to like 2014, where I feel like there was a lot of like these movies where you were seeing things, dramatic portrayals of life in places that you knew existed, but you didn't really understand. And I mean, I never watched Ozark on Netflix, but I feel like the Ozarks.
You definitely need to do that. Side note.
I did things, but I mean, I think like that, Southern poverty thing. Not that it's been overdone, but in the time since this movie, and maybe this movie partially ushered that in, has become more of a setting for fiction and nonfiction, frankly, that it is maybe a little numbed in perception of it for you, for me, than it would have been. I can imagine like this would have, a year out of college, been like, damn, this movie's super intense.
Yeah.
And it just didn't hit quite as hard as it would have back then.
No, I think I agree with both of those perspectives, that, as an expose of this slice of rural poverty and of showing a lifestyle that, in the 2010s people weren't as familiar with. I think, Kyle, it's the fact that, we're all, more familiar with different slices of society. I think collectively, like you were saying, Dustin, we're more familiar with these types of environments. The one thing I appreciated on this watch was, not the shocking, like, oh, we're gonna like really, challenge your perceptions of how people live, but the texture and the shading it gave to all these individual lives. And in a movie that's so sparse with dialogue, that's pretty sparse with story, there's so much that just gets communicated by the set design, by the mise en scène, by like the shit that you see in people's houses. And as she was going through all those characters' houses, I found myself, trying to put the pieces together of what their life, would be like outside of the frame, based on, the food that they were eating, or the baby bottles that were stacked up. And so I think the set design really does a lot of legwork to move beyond that, like, we're gonna expose this into, we're gonna really give you a textured look at what these people's, lives were like. And I think the other part that I also latched onto this time was, I said this in my Letterboxd review, but how kind of nimbly the movie moves between different genres and kind of cribs different elements from them. There's a lot of film noir in the detective mystery that she's unraveling. It's clearly a coming of age story, but I think what I liked the most was the moments where it became a Western. And I think those are the moments where it felt the most timeless and less rooted in that, contemporary perspective, where you've got the first scene where the sheriff rolls up and the neighbors are looking on, and they're really tense and menacing, and like that felt very Sergio Leone, like classic spaghetti western to me. There's a stand-up with Teardrop and the sheriff where they're looking through the reflective mirrors in the car. Again, the staging there was very classic western. Even the shot where Teardrop comes to the rescue and saves the day when she's being tortured, the garage door opens up and he's square in the middle of the frame, like, classic western hero coming to the rescue. I like the way that it used that iconography to recontextualize this world and, kind of be like, well, here's what a contemporary Western looks like. So I think those are the elements, like the set design, the staging, and the way it cribbed from, that genre that jumped out at me most this time.
Yeah. And just like, and also in general, just pretty great performances across the board, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Like there was just, they really embodied all of that.
Speaking, I want to do two. I had this book when I was like in high school that was called "Hey, It's That Guy." It was a little tiny. It was like 3x4 book, and it was like character actors, and it gave a little bio of them and like movies you would see. And there was two I had in here. Well, one I recognized, the sheriff, Garrett Dillahunt. I love him because he has just like a face you kind of want to punch. He like looks like a douche, and he plays a great douche. He was in a TV show I never watched on Fox called Raising Hope. That was like a comedic role for him. But I always think of him in the movie The Road with Viggo Mortensen. He is one of like the cannibals that's hunting people, and the one that they like encounter
at one
point. He always jumps out at me for that. And then the real one where I was like, I fucking know that guy. Where do I know that guy from? Kevin Bresnahan, who was Little Arthur in this. So the guy in the crack house, which isn't really narrowing it down in this movie too much. Right?
Yes, which meth house are you referring to?
The one he was with the group when they when she finally met Thump Mason and stuff. But he was in, you were talking about Superbad before, he was in Superbad. He was the guy who was like stoned out of his head and made Michael Cera sing these eyes for him.
You sing good.
And I was like, when I finally figured that out, I was like, I knew this guy looks familiar. So that was really fun to like recognize, like, because I wasn't able to figure out who he was for a while. And I was like, does he just have a face that looks familiar? And then I was like, no, that's where he is.
That's amazing. Thank you for taking us on that journey that I would not have known anything about.
It's funny. He was just so strung out that I think that was like, I was like, oh, that's Superbad guy. Like I just, oh
that's
man.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, this was my first kind of introduction to John Hawkes way back when. I mean, it may be really his first kind of breakout role as well with Jennifer Lawrence, but man, because of this movie, every single thing John Hawkes does, I'm like, yeah, I'm interested. I want to see what's going on here. Like, dude has a lot of range, and that is a terrifying character. And just the constant key bumps of what has to be just absolutely terrible cocaine.
Oh yeah,
I can only imagine in this world that the cocaine is not quite pure. But yeah, it was interesting to again watch this so much later, and just have a different take on the whole world. And I think it is, it hasn't aged well. It's kind of like, you reminded when you were talking, I was kind of like, if they made War Games, the movie this year, this movie kind of like, I don't care. I'm not interested in these stakes, you know what I mean? But War Games, when it came out in 1984, insane, and like hits on a stress of the time, and hits on a stress that exists in that zeitgeist that we just don't have anymore. We're like, we got nukes everywhere. We could die at any moment. The world's bucking us instantly. Like,
War Games today would be like a mobile app that someone like so somehow starts like texting with the Whopper computer, who gets a random text that's like, hey Dustin, this is June. Do you want to play a game? Like one of those phishing texts that's out there now.
Yeah, it's just ChatGPT gone wrong.
Yeah. Well, let's shift over to Itu Mama También, the oldest movie in this crew, because I guess we watched them in a reverse chronological order, because they came out in 2001. Why did you pick this one?
I picked this one again, like kind of going back to movies that had a bigger effect on me when I saw them first. And this is going to be, I would have seen this movie for the first time in like 2009, 2010.
Okay.
And this 2009.
How old were you in 2009, 2010?
26, 27.
Okay.
Something like that. I'm not a math guy.
What year were you born?
1984. So
I didn't agree to do this podcast with someone older than me, Alec. No, I'm kidding.
I'm turning 40 soon, baby. E2 Mama También also, like, just to give a little more background on myself and my whatever, me getting into film. Essentially, I left graduate school and I moved to New York City in in a bit of a coming of age tale myself, guys. And there's
the classic mid-20s coming of age tale.
Classic mid-20s trauma. Moved to New York, figure it all out, or not. Had to go to Korea to really cap that one off. But during that time period, when I lived in New York, I went to a lot of movies and I had access to a lot of movies in the theater that I just never had growing up in Rochester, New York. I had some, but not the same way. Like, I never really understood this whole, like, oh yeah, this comes out in New York and LA until I lived in New York. And I was like, man, there is just, and then like there's art houses there's art houses that are 3 miles away that are playing a completely different lineup, and they have 8 different movies. It was like amazing. So I kind of like really, really got into it starting there. But then I worked for a friend's warehouse where I had a very monotonous job where I worked alone and I could listen to podcasts. And I listened to about 8 hours of Film Spotting a day until I listened to every single episode that had ever come out at that point. It was like 300 episodes that I churned through. It was amazing. And E2 Mama También was a big, it's in that pantheon on that podcast, all those things. But like they really liked it. And it's a movie that I watched and I kind of had I don't know. I had an experience with as a much younger person that, again, seeing it now, I was a little bit more focused on her than I was on the boys. And like the boys' behavior was so overtly childish that it was to the point of like, this is a little like hilarious how much Koran is hammering home how immature these two guys are.
Right.
And also, I had not seen this movie in so long that I totally forgot that she has cancer and dies at the end. Spoiler alert. Like, I didn't even remember that at all. I remembered all the crazy sex stuff. I remembered all the, like, just the insane young boy energy that's on display. And that's kind of what I thought about. And like, I was more interested in them as friends and their journey as friends than I was, and she was kind of a vehicle for that. And in this one, I was much more interested in her story. And then sort of toward the end, I realized I kind of had an inkling of like, there's something coming here that I've forgotten about. And then at the end, I did. So
right, when that shoe drops.
Yeah.
And I had spoiled that for myself because I read the plot of this, not like a year or two ago, I read the plot of this movie on Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. Which is a bad habit of mine, but like movies that I'm not sure I want to see, but I think I'd be willing to see even if I know the plot spoiler. I had known that. And what I didn't know watching this was that reveal didn't come until the very end.
Yeah.
That was a surprise. So it was still a surprise for me because I knew that, but I assumed that she was going to tell them at some point in their journey together, and she never did. And I was like, oh. Did I misremember this? Like, is that not the case? And then I got that at the very end.
Yeah. So, I mean, the short answer is I picked this because, like, I hadn't seen it in a while, and you two hadn't seen it. And I think in general, like, Koran is a very interesting director. I think does interesting movies, and I think the way that this unfolds with all those little offshoots where they talk about like these pigs and like this person who was killed, like all those things are it's a very unique way to make a film and set a scene and make a movie that I just think not even considering coming of age stuff is like interesting that I had totally forgotten about. But really, I just like it was a movie I wanted you two to see. And in all the blind spots that existed in whatever the genre was. So, and movie I wanted to watch for the first time in a long time.
I was not liking this until I finished it. Like I was really struggling with it. And some of it was like, I mean, I can't think of a movie where I've watched guys piss in the toilet more than this movie. And I think there was a scene that I noticed like halfway through where they go to a hotel and Diego Luna's character is like going to piss on the toilet, and it's after the narrator talks about how there's like different things that they each do that they don't know about, and he lifts the toilet with his foot at the other guy's house and whatever. And then I noticed him lifting the toilet seat, but then he says something about how, there's piss all over this toilet. This is totally random aside, but he says that, and then he ends up pissing, but he like steps on the toilet when he's pissing. And I'm like, A, who the fuck does that? And B, if there's piss all over the toilet, why the fuck are you doing that? That bothered me.
I think he had to do that because otherwise the seat was going to come down.
Oh, maybe that.
I think it was such a shitty hotel that like it was one of those things where I also was like, what the fuck is this? Why is he doing that?
Yeah.
And then the way that when he removed his foot and it just came down, I was like,
okay.
But
right,
I agree, it was like this guy's a psychopath.
Yeah. So I think like this was one I'd heard of. I heard that it was, a well-regarded film. I had seen the clip of them dancing at the very end on the beach, like very briefly, like when she hits the jukebox and that great scene of her like dancing at the camera. I've seen that because I've seen that in like compilation videos of like dancing in movies and stuff. I had no idea that it was going to be, I'm going to use the term, but it implies I'm offended. I'm not really offended, but I had no idea it was going to be as vulgar as it was. It is so vulgar, which is a little jarring. And like, to your point, Kyle, like, does a great job at underscoring how immature these two kids are, but like pretty much, at least in today's lens, like goes overboard with it to the point where it's like farcical and like kind of makes it very unrelatable to me. Like I was not a kid who was like, I lost my virginity to my wife. So like I was not a kid that was in high school, in college, whatever, that was talking about who did you fuck? Like we're fucking them. Like let's go lay on the diving boards and like masturbate together while we're like talking about
wild.
We want to have sex. Completely like.
I just got to point out there was that camera shot when they come into the water and you get it from below the water. And it's like this beautiful artistic depiction of the most vile shit. And I feel like that is this movie in a nutshell.
When that happened, I'm pretty sure like my reaction was like, ugh, yeah. But I did like, I liked it more at like once it all resolved, because it became like, I finally understood what was going, like the rationale behind, at least how I interpret it, behind the narrator and giving all these like deeper stories, especially the pig one in particular, like suddenly going down that path. And and then like learning their development that like after this happened, they left Lucia there, they went home, their girlfriends came and broke up with them, they got different girlfriends, they felt like that was like the end of the friendship. Then they ran into each other and like just decided to get coffee because it was less awkward than not doing it. And then I thought it was kind of amazing, like brilliant how like at the end when they're saying goodbyes, like the narrator's like, yeah, like, the one guy said he'll take the bill. They said goodbye. They never saw each other again. And then
that kind of broke my heart.
And then it cuts back in and like Diego Luna's like, we'll talk soon, okay? And it's like, I can probably think of a dozen friendships I've had in that same regard that like were people I was so close to and that just faded out without any real fanfare. And I think that the narration that was happening was to really underscore that this experience was so much a punctuated moment in time, and that everything, outside of the here and now, there's this, like when they're driving down the freeway and they talk about like, oh, if they'd been here 18 months earlier, there would have been overturned bird cages in the road and dead people to the side. And then they see the memorials. It's like, yeah, like where we are in our individual timelines is a product of a much grander scope. And like it felt more poetic to me in thinking of like, just appreciate the moment you're in, because a year from now, like this could all feel like a completely different life that you're astonished you ever lived. And seeing how the two of them engaged, how they were addressed and in their demeanors when they were at the coffee shop, I think really underscored that point of like, oh, like this, I mean, in a way, this was like the most literal coming of age movie of these three to me, that it just very much was like, yeah, they had this very defining experience of having this threesome, and suddenly like their lives were forever changed, not necessarily for the worse or anything, but like that was the fork in their road that put them down their separate paths. And it was very clearly done, almost too clearly in a way at the very end of that
Yeah.
parting thing.
No, I agree with all that. I think that that juxtaposition is this movie's like secret weapon that it uses again and again, where you're seeing these scenes of just, pure frivolity, pure like debauchery, and then the sound cuts out and you get the narration where it's like, like you were saying, Dustin, they're driving down a road. It's really an accident. This guy died. It's capturing the fleetingness and the transience of these experiences. And I agree that the cartoonishness of like, how horny and stupid they were at times was like, a little bit hard to relate to, but I think it captured, you know, just that emotional reality of having these experiences when you're on the cusp of adolescence, adulthood, and how they can just be lost like that. And that even while you're having these experiences, the rest of the world isn't like stopping for you. While you're like messing around with your friends and like getting drunk for the first time, or having whatever like kind of awakening experience you might be having at age 17 or 18, you know people are still dying, there's still political upheaval, there's trauma that informs all of the frivolity, because they give those little like background snippets the narrator does into like the various fucked up family dynamics that all the characters have. And to me, I think that's perfectly captured in the scene where, why am I blanking on Louisa? Louisa is calling her boyfriend, her ex, and she's in the phone booth, and you've got that gorgeous frame of the reflective part of the phone booth is showing um, uh, Tencho and Julio playing pool, and she is like sobbing and getting increasingly, desperate, and they're having the time of their lives, like they're laughing, they're joking. I thought this movie lacked subtlety in a lot of
Yeah.
places, and I could have used less of that narration. I think there's a clumsiness to it
Oh
that,
yeah.
it kind of pushed me away from really loving it. I really, really liked it. I'm super glad I watched it, but it's definitely not my favorite of the three. But that scene I thought was perfect, just showcasing that theme visually,
Yeah.
of those two worlds.
Well, even just, I mean, I'm guessing this isn't what you meant by clumsy, but like even technically speaking, the narration was kind of sloppy in the way it was executed, which was a little jarring at first, because I could probably count on one hand the number of times that like I thought my audio screwed up because everything went completely silent and there was a pregnant pause.
Yeah.
And then the narrator cut in. And I think it's also like I don't I don't care enough about this to like really go through the full thought exercise, but I'm guessing that if you would have taken out the narration entirely, that it wouldn't really have like it certainly wouldn't have changed the story per se, but like I don't think it would have like really impacted how, at least for me, how I interpreted it or anything too heavily. I feel like the all that the narration did was like provide a bolder punctuation point to me of like, oh, it's all about this moment. But learning that she died and like where the two of them are at 14 months later or whatever it is in the diner, that also did that for me. It was kind of like one or the other would have sufficed for it. I think the more interesting one is to show their evolution as characters and people and have them in the diner. But yeah, if you take that narration out, like it's not changing anything that the characters go through. It's just adding a layer of like perspective that isn't really necessary, especially is less relatable. I think some of the political stuff that I was talking about to people that aren't from Mexico or aren't familiar with Mexican political history and things like that. Like I can see, I mean, I'm assuming he didn't make this intentionally for like Americans, obviously. So, but it's a yeah.
I mean, I see what you're saying. I guess I think that I don't necessarily think I would think differently about the characters, but I do think if you lose that narration, you do lose a little bit of that. You lose a little bit of the punch of that scene that Alex was highlighting, where life is going on. Your tragedy doesn't mean that that's the whole world, and like, and just because you're also having the time of your life doesn't mean there isn't also horrible shit happening as well. And I think that that's kind of it's again, who knows, and maybe it's just what I'm taking from it, but that is an interesting. It's an interesting aspect to have in a coming of age tale where the whole genre is kind of like, nah, it's about this person's becoming. It's about this person's evolution. It's about this, like, it's very hyper focused on, it's all about you, which is kind of how coming of age feels and how it feels to be the young adolescence, right? It is all about you. And so I do agree that, like, it actually, I would be interested in watching this without any of the narration to see. And I would like to Men in Black myself to be able to actually do that, and then see it with the narration for the second time. But I think maybe it's kind of a subversion of the coming of age tale to bring those things in, and perhaps that was some of the point of bringing some of those other things in. So I mean, I do see what you're saying. It was jarring at times, and it did actually. I was kind of surprised how long it took me to get into the movie.
Yeah,
it was another movie that didn't really track my previous experience with it. And I had to kind of really sit with it. And the subtitles made that more like, all right, I have to actually really be engaged and get to what this movie was trying to kind of accomplish. And really, I think why it spoke to me back then and still to a lot of ways speaks to me now is just the sadness of, like, a lot of coming of age feels like we're getting to a better place, and that final scene doesn't feel that way, and like we're at another place, but we're definitely not at necessarily a better place. And how you can, just kind of abandon, and not even necessarily abandon in a very intentional way. Like like you said, Dustin, like you have these great experiences, you have these great friends, and then life just kind of finds a way to get between things, and you're off on different paths. And then at some point you connect or you don't connect, but they just kind of fall away and without ceremony, even after big climactic events, like this trip. And so, and how they had just how their friendship seems so in the beginning and through most of the movie, even through them both revealing that they've been screwing each other's girlfriends multiple times, and how that affected them so much, even though they were both pieces of shit or just youth, how I kind of, and I just have long-standing friendships of people that I grew up with, and how.
Whose girlfriends you screwed?
I mean, no, but there is, a long enough timeline, there's some cross-contamination. And it was kind of interesting just to see they go through that experience, and then they also have the threesome and the and all that together, and how that they survive that on the trip, but then they don't in life.
And they just grow apart. Yeah, naturally.
That was a very hard move for me to accept.
Yeah. Well, I think,
and yet I understand it.
Well, yeah, and what you said about like how even after this like very like life defining definitive trip that they went on with a very, I mean, I would assume a threesome with an older woman would be like a very life at that age, like a huge milestone in your life. And how like you would think something like that, even, I mean, putting a different lens to it, like their scene when they're kissing and like the level of intimacy that they have holding each other's heads and stuff, like there clearly was like an emotional connection. I mean, even before that there's an emotional connection, but there was like an emotional sexual connection there. But the fact that they go home and it all just fizzles out, like, again, to me just underscores the like, yeah, like you can, the surest of things are not certain, nothing's set in stone. Like no matter how, everything just changes day to day. Like you can get as poetic or unpoetic as you want about it, but like that I think is what brought me back in liking this movie is just like this idea of like, yeah, like even like the most momentous, important like experience of your life up to that point, it still doesn't necessarily like portend your expected outcome from it. Like you're in the yeah, I don't know. I thought that was like a very pronounced way of putting it, and I think that end scene like resonated with me more than anything else in terms of like, yeah, like I can't tell you how many people I was close friends with and I've gotten coffee with them or gotten a beer with them and thought like maybe more would come of it, and it just didn't. And it's crushing in a different way when friendships fizzle out like that, because you don't usually realize they fizzled out until it's long after they fizzled out, when something triggers that memory. And so
it's much easier when they break. It's like,
yeah,
it's much easier to understand
Exactly.
when they just are like, oh no, fuck that guy.
yep.
You know what I mean? Like that something happened and something went down, and it's just much easier to understand on a narrative way, as opposed to I spent like 2 summers hanging out with this person, and then it just, how did it?
Yeah.
Like I had a best friend growing up who moved like a mile away. I could have just rode my bike, and yet somehow he went to a different middle school, and like we're still friends now. But he was someone who was my best friend who just.
Yeah,
it just, it just kind of
it kind of makes you wonder, like these two characters, like, what, as they grow in life, I mean, thinking about where they would be today 23 years later from the timing of the movie, like what they would think of when they think back to that friendship, right? Like what is the most, we don't know how long they were friends, but like when they reminisce about that friendship, are they thinking about her? Or are they thinking about the time leading up to her? Are they thinking about their time with their 2 girlfriends who were best friends? Like that whole dynamic is kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, this felt like a sending off of youth as opposed to a coming of age, I guess is
yeah. Because that's a good point, because we don't get anything after that transition, right? It's all up to that moment and then scene, which is, I mean, I guess that's, well, no, we kind of get, it's kind of similar with Winter's Bone, but Boyhood we're watching all the way through. Like any place you could have ended Boyhood would have felt like it was ending one chapter going to the next. But yeah, this was an interesting view for me, because I can't think of a lot of movies where like I was like, oh, I love this, and then at the end, not that I was like, this is amazing, but like
it came together for you in a new way.
Like I think it gained, on that scale of 5 stars, I think it gained back a star that it had lost halfway through, by the way it was wrapped up, which was a pleasant surprise.
No, that's fair. I mean, just hearing you guys talk about it and talk about that sadness, that fleetingness of of this experience ending. Wistful is the word I keep thinking about when I'm thinking about the ending of this movie, and how there's just this deep melancholy about that experience being over, about this chapter in their lives being over, and them kind of being forced to confront these other parts of their reality. And I was also thinking about how much their drifting apart may or may not have been informed by the experiences we see them have through the movie, specifically the intimacy of that threesome. And, whether that was just too much emotional intimacy, because that's something I think, you can also relate to with friendships, where you have a friendship that gets like really, really close, and like there are elements of, maybe codependency, maybe you're spending too much time together. I think when you're jerking off on parallel diving boards, there's an indication you might be spending too much time together. But I do wonder if that drifting apart was almost a relief, because they had become so intertwined, sexually, emotionally. Like I bet it was, probably just easier to part ways than to reckon with that experience and then go, where does our friendship go from here?
Well, and also like, friendships, like especially those ones that can go into that codependency or can get towards the, I don't know, negative side of relationships, be it sexual or not. They can be the kind of thing that, not even necessarily through anyone's fault, but like they can be the kind of thing that hold you back, right? They could be the kind of thing that you need to take a break from or shove off, like, get away from to be actually get to a new place in your life. In a way that, like, Jennifer Lawrence's character in Winter's Bone cannot. She cannot get away from that world, right? It's all consuming, and there's nothing she can do. She's tied down, and she can't just shrug it off. The world will always be with her unless she makes some crazy dramatic, runs away from her family, from her kid, from her, siblings, all that.
She has that great line, just to interject, that I love, where she's like, "I need the weight of you on my back."
Yeah.
And I think that's such a nice line.
Yeah, and no, yeah, absolutely, that is a nice line, and that's just something that those two characters in Y Tu Mama, they have the luxury of being able to do that, of being able to have those experiences and then leave them in the past to find, to get serious about life and get degrees and get jobs and whatever.
Yeah. Well, should we wrap this up by each giving a ranking of our least favorite to our most favorite of these three?
Yeah, I think we should. I also think I clearly have to get a Letterboxd account so I can start. Yeah, this is very clear. This is very clear to me.
This is your assignment.
This is my homework.
Yes,
I must.
That is excellent news. Very happy about your awakening.
I will do. Yes, I've come of age on this podcast right away. I'm right before everyone hears I'm doing it. I mean, for me, clearly this was Boyhood, Winter's Bone, Y Tu Mama.
In order of, so you're doing favorite to least. Okay.
Yeah. Favorite to least are just, that's, I literally watched Boyhood 3 times because I couldn't stop, and I will watch it again and again as I age. But I agree, don't think I'll necessarily return to Winter's Bone or Y Tu Mama for quite some time, if ever. So so for me, that's my ranking.
Alex, how about you?
I think I might have the same ranking. I think I go Boyhood at the top, to Winter's Bone, to Y Tu Mamá También. Liked to loved, all three. Y2 being the liked end of the spectrum, Boyhood being the loved. But yeah, I'm glad that I checked Y2 off my blind spotting list. It's one that I feel like has just been a movie that cinephiles love and love talking about. So it was nice to be part of that conversation.
Yeah. For me, I would say, Boyhood, easy. I struggle with 2. I actually feel like I'm going to have to go down the route of Y Tu Mamá También for the mid one. Just because I feel like, I'm not in any rush to revisit this, but this is one I can see myself rewatching at least once. It strikes a nostalgia nerve for me in the same way that Garden State does, which Garden State was like very much like my coming of age movie of like, I that came out, I think, in 2004 or something, like right when I was graduating high school. And I recently rewatched it like a year or 2 ago, and it like really, I didn't hate it as much as I thought I was going to hate it after loving it for so long. Yeah. But I was also like, this feels like a movie that came out 20 years ago, and feels like, Dustin, who had a live journal and like wrote about his feelings every day.
Big on Friendster. Huge on Friendster, that Dustin.
Yes. But so, and then Winter's Bone, I feel like, again, I'm glad I watched it. I didn't hate it, but I feel like no desire to come back to that. Like, I feel like there's probably instances of a similar thematic story that have been told since that movie came out that are more appealing to me, both in terms of, environment, setting, characters, things like that. So that would be my order.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Even as like Alex was saying what he was doing, I was like, I don't know about 2 and 3. 2 and 3 is just tough. It's a tough shakeout on that. But Boyhood's clearly the one, but it's tough. Well, what are we doing next?
I think for the next one here, I think I'm up, right? I believe so.
You are indeed.
Yeah, so we'll tease that here. Maybe I'll cut this out, maybe not. But we're gonna do John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, which is The Thing. Oh God, this is gonna get edited. It's The Thing and Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness. So I believe The Thing is like 82. Prince of Darkness is mid to late 80s, and then In the Mouth of Madness is 1992. I've seen all 3. The Thing is in my top 4 movies easily. Another letterbox thing. You have to pick your top 4, Kyle. Which ones have you guys seen of those 3?
The Thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm super stoked for this because I've only seen The Thing, and In the Mouth of Madness has been on my list for a while as someone who likes Lovecraft-inspired shit. I know the reputation that one has among Carpenter fans. So yeah, I'm stoked for that. And Prince of Darkness, which feels like a lesser discussed Carpenter, at least in my experience.
I think Prince of Darkness is legit underrated. I'm excited to talk about this with you guys because like I think my first time I saw Prince of Darkness, I caught it on like Sci-Fi Channel in high school or something. And there's a particular recurring scene, which by me saying recurring, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, that terrified me as a kid because it just felt so weird and like just unnerving. It's not like outright terrifying, but it just unsettled the hell out of me. And Prince of Darkness just has some great practical effects. Also has Alice Cooper as a homeless person that gets some shit happens to them, which is pretty cool.
I mean, this to me is like, this is one of the reasons that I'm excited to be doing this with you guys, because those are just 2 movies I would never watch on my own accord. Yeah. And that's not a statement on those movies. It's more of a statement on me and just like where my natural inclinations go. And so,
well, that's exactly with these 3 coming of age movies. Like they were all shit that like I was never like, oh hell no, I don't want to watch that, but I never just felt compelled to do it. So
let's break out of some comfort zones, boys, and see some new shit. I love it.